Okay, so I'm just gonna start with like I'm gonna introduce. I'm
Okay.
gonna introduce myself,
Okay.
and then I'm gonna introduce you.
Okay.
And then just this. I have questions, but
Okay.
this is more. This is gonna be like more just free, like
Okay.
just we're gonna have a conversation, and I'll
Okay.
ask you questions, but don't
Yeah.
just say whatever you want.
Okay.
Don't feel like you have to like be
Okay.
acting or anything like that.
Kind of let the conversation go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, my name is David Price. I'm sitting here with Buck Patton, and I want to talk to him about his memories of growing up as a child during World War II. Okay, so the first question I have, just to start at the beginning,
Okay.
is where do you come from? Where were you born?
Well, I was born and native of West Texas. Matter of fact, it was a little place called Roundup just outside Lubbock, Texas. And I was born in 1935. That was just about for the World War II began with the United States was 6 years before 1940. Even though the war started in 39, I guess, with England and Germany and so forth, America stayed out of it until 1941. Best I was not. I can remember I was 6 years old, and I can remember as a child, 6 years of age, going to school, starting my first year in school in a little place in West Texas there called Shallow-Water, and we lived in for some reason back in those days things were different. We lived in a hotel. My dad rented a hotel. The whole thing belonged to us, and we all, family and whatever, lived there in it. In a small town. And I had an uncle, my mother's Uncle Harmon. And while we were there, he came to stay with us a little while, and he was on his way to boot camp whenever he got called, and he left there, and he was in the ship. Well, I think he'd already done boot camp, and he was being assigned to go overseas to fight in a war. As it turned out, I had 5 uncles from my mother's side that served in World War II at the same time. All of them served in action, and they all came home. None of them were killed.
Okay, so they all. That was actually one thing I was going to ask you, was if you had any family that went.
Right.
So you had a bunch of people, a bunch of family members.
5 uncles. They all served in World War II at the same time. I think 1 or 2 of them was in the Navy. I think it was 1, or so in the Marine Corps, but they was Army mostly, United States Army, and they served in Europe and in the islands of Japan. My Uncle Harmon, he served. He spent a lot of time in Australia. That was a kind of a jumping off point to invade into Japan. But they all came home, and they all lived and died natural lives in this country.
Okay, well, yeah, that's so being that you said you were born in 1935, whenever the war was actually happening, you were maybe.
I was pretty young, and I can just remember some of the things. Being young, as I grew, that was in 41, and I was, like I said, was 6 years old, and I began to get a little older, and I remember that we moved. My dad, he was not called into the military because he had a large family. There was I had a sister just below me, 2 years younger than me, and I had a sister just a year or 2 younger than her, and then I had a sister older than me, and I can't remember now. I think I had a younger brother, and there was 9 of us children, and I think at the time when the war broke out, they were all home except the 2 younger ones.
So back then the conscription had sort of like a family burden thing to it, where you could sort of get out of it.
Right, and Dad was a farmer, and during the war they didn't take the farmers. They needed the farmers to maintain food supplies and farm merchandise for the cattle and hogs and everything that had to be taken care of, and so he didn't get called in for that now.
So basically, your dad had a different important duty during the war, which was supplying food back at home.
And unfortunately, we left the farm because I had an uncle that didn't have any children, and Dad had plenty of children that kept him out of the service, and my uncle, he took over the farm, and that kept him out of the service. But I do remember and we moved up to a little place in Texas, Canyon, Texas, And from there we moved up to Stinnett, Texas. And I remember Stinnett quite a bit more. It was probably around 1943 that I really began to remember some of the things about the war. And I remember seeing during those times, a lot of troop trains, a lot of soldiers, there was a lot of military vehicles on the road then. Of course, there wasn't a lot of cars either at that time. Gas was rationed. Shoes were rationed, leather. Sugar was rationed. There was a lot of rations. And so you didn't get to go when you wanted to because most of us going to the war purpose.
How did that feel? I mean, you were young, obviously, but how did that feel in comparison to like today, like with the recession we're in, and how everything we relate back to the recession, like gas prices are this high. Like, was it kind of like that kind of vibe where people were talking about the burden, or was it more like we have to do this for?
It was more like the country pulled together and rallied together.
Okay.
Now a lot of when the war broke out, the military built up real quick, but it wasn't all draft. I would say, I don't know what the actual figures were, but when that war broke out, probably half of the soldiers that went into service volunteered. They seen the need in our country, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of young men volunteered and went to war. They didn't wait for the draft to get them. They fought because they knew we pulled together as a nation. Gas was cheap. We didn't get a lot of it because it was rationed. Rubber, tires. You had to wore tires down to the rubber was bald because all of it went to the military.
Yeah.
The gas, clothing, most everything, but nobody complained. Nobody complained. We all pulled together. There was a lot of national pride. There was no real dissension back in those days, none at all. I don't remember any. Fear? No, we never had any doubts that we would win the war. I remember very clearly my parents talking about it, and they would buy a newspaper every once in a while, and it showed pictures in the newspaper of where the fight was being fought for the day, in Sicily or in Japan, and they'd show how it was little maps where that they had fought for that day. And then as I got a little older, if we went to a movie, we had it called Movie Stone. And they'd have someone had been over there and recorded on film, and during intermission, they would show these war pictures that were taking place. It was probably about 10 or 15 minutes of the Movie Stone. And of course, the time we got it, that action that had taken place that we see now every day, that had already happened probably about a month or so in the past, but that was the only way we could get caught up in what was fighting. The magazines, Life magazine, everything showed all the fighting and all the soldiers and everything.
So much of the media, those films that would play, magazines, newspapers, it was mostly devoted to.
It was all America. They was all devoted to one thing: to win the war. There was no dissension. I was being young. I didn't know about it, but I would have heard something. The general population was wanting to win that war. No, to my knowledge, I never heard of any dissension, none whatsoever.
Okay, so there probably was some elements of fear and like mothers not wanting their sons to leave.
It's possible.
But for the most part, there was more of an optimistic response than it was like a bleak depression. It was more just
right. Depression we didn't have. America was concerned. Well, depression, I never detected that whatsoever. And of course, I was 10 years old when it actually ended, but by that time I had begun to get more knowledge. We lived in a little town in Stinnett, and it was kind of a main highway. And I seen many troop trucks going right past us all the time. And I seen them pull into, there's a cafe across there. That old one-horse town of Stinnett, probably at the time maybe was 300, 400, 500 people. I don't even remember. but there was a lot of troop trucks that went through there. You see a lot of soldiers. Then we moved out to the country from there on a lease, and from in town, and there was a train that came right close to our house. We lived on the side of a kind of a cliff, a little hill, and there was a big curve, and there was a troop train came by there 2 or 3 every week, and they used to. My mother used to go out to and wave at them. They waved back, and they were just delighted to see us. But that was one of the rare things that we did. Everybody go out there and wave at those soldiers, and they all hanging out the windows and waving at, and we knew that they was going to war.
Mm-hmm.
But they all had good attitudes.
Yeah.
All good attitudes. Things weren't high. It just wasn't a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so obviously, as we've touched on, you were really young throughout most of it.
Yes.
So what? And that's kind of fascinating because we can read all about World War II in the history books and get like objective accounts of it, but it's really interesting to hear like first person accounts of it, and one that's kind of fascinating to me is like the perspective of a child. So like, how did you? I mean, obviously you say you don't remember a lot of it, but how did you feel about it whenever it was happening? Did you really understand what was going on fully? How did you feel about it? And
I pretty much had a feeling for it. I pretty much did, but I was not led to be in fear. Never was I in any fear. We always felt that we would win.
So your parents spoke?
My parents spoke of winning. We never worried about losing. And as I got a little older, we'd play soldiers. As far as the war was concerned, I pretty well knew that it was a war, real bad one. And of course, I'm not going to try to shorten it up, but I remember the day that the Germans quit. And I think I was in the 3rd grade, the best I can remember. I was in the 3rd grade in school. And someone come to the door and knocked on the door, and they came in. And our teacher was in Stinnett, Texas. She was 3rd or 4th, I cannot be sure. But she looked at this newspaper. They handed her a newspaper. And she looked at this newspaper, and she turned it around and held it up, and I remember reading it. Great big bold letters, probably about 6-8 letters. Nazis quit. They surrendered. Because they bombed. I mean, the Germans, they were beat.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, later was when the Japanese was beat. But I remember very clearly that we fought in 2 different places, in Germany and the Pacific. And most of my memories, I can't say it was one or the other. I remember specifically Germany, Adolf Hitler. We all hated Hitler. Everybody hated Hitler. And then we all hated Hirohito, the Japanese emperor.
Yeah.
They were both hated people. Now, I heard a lot of sadness during that time that our boys were captured and the death marches they put them on. And later on in my life, whenever I got older and I seen the film, I seen a lot of what I remembered that they told us about these death marches. And but I didn't really get to full scope of that. I didn't understand a lot of that.
Well, I mean, personally, I remember, hearing about stuff with like even before like 9/11, stuff with Saddam Hussein.
Right.
Hearing that kind of stuff and hearing about it in the news and hearing my parents and you guys talking about that, and just the way that I thought about it was he was kind of like I just thought about him as like a bad guy. Like I thought about him as almost like a boogeyman type character. So is that how you felt about like Hitler? Was he almost like a boogeyman or like some sort of like scary story that you'd be told? 'Cause that's how I felt about those kind of guys when I was younger.
I really, best I can remember, seemed like he was kind of like a satanic man, or a Satan type of guy. The world hated him. There were only 2 countries that fought with him, was him and Mussolini of Italy, and but it was a kind of a thing of awe that this guy is, because they would show some films in these pictures in magazines of him screaming and hollering, and then they would have him sometimes on those movie stones. He captured some film that he had taken out of there, and he was a frightening man, scary, really. Not so much boogeyman, he was just afraid of him.
Okay, just as a final question,
Okay.
you know, obviously, as we've discussed, you're too young to, you know, have to, you know, go to war. Obviously,
Right.
maybe a little too young to really understand the full scope and horror of the reality of the
Right.
situation.
That's true.
But you know, in recent years, you know, as you've gotten older, like, do you ever reflect on that time? You ever think back on
Yes,
it?
I do quite a bit. I do, and particularly since we've been given the History Channel on TV, and DVDs and VCRs. They have a lot of that stuff on tape, and they've shown it since. I wonder where they got it all, but it's all on tape, and I look back, and it's very traumatic when I look back and remember. I remember when I was a kid at that time, and I remember that those boys that was fighting and dying, and they were actual film that they captured even from the Germans and the Japanese. They captured the film and seeing the way they were treated, and sometimes in those death camps, some of those men would be standing there, bones, just showing bones. They hadn't been fed. They were alive, but just barely. And you see the bones, all of the ribs, cages. And as I look back and I think, oh my God, how sad it was. I just did not know how sad it really was. And it, whenever I look back, it traumatized me. And so, for that reason, I've had a harder time than most people with the friendship of Germany and Japan, because I've seen how our boys were treated, and it still kind of haunts me. Now, I know that this group of people living now didn't do it, but I still get traumatized when I see them. So, you know, I haven't watched it lately because it's really kind of sad to see what happens. And I remember I seen a lot of these movies. You've probably seen some of them too. That when the Japanese was losing the war, when they sent these kamikaze pilots into these ships, and it was so frightful. They did everything they could to stop it, but they couldn't. And that plane was coming in, it was firing, boom, it hit that ship, and a lot of men died. And even though we didn't even, what did we gain for all those lives? Now we're friends. Lots of lives. And those things today bother me. But, you know, life goes on. And I don't look back on it anymore. But yeah, I've seen a lot of things. As I got older, I wanted to know about things that I didn't quite understand then. And I was kind of intrigued about.
Okay, well, thank you for
you're quite
taking the
welcome.
time to stop and have a conversation with me about
I'm
this.
happy to. If there's anything that I didn't cover for you, well, you're welcome to ask me, because I just give you the best what I can remember.
Okay.
And a lot of my memories are here, there. It's not in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, you're like a storybook. Storybooks, you start off and you tell the story, and then there's an ending, there's a beginning, and all the things in between the ending. And in this particular case, yeah, there was a beginning, World War II, and there was an ending. But a lot of the stories in between there, I could just pick up pieces that I remembered. I was young, so, but I do remember a lot of them. That's about it. So that's as far as I can take it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You bet, Andy.
Mhm.
Hope it helps you out.
Thank you.